So welcome back to the Trade Squad. This is part 2 of episode 7, and I'm turning this one over to Anthony because this topic was his pick. We are talking about Chinese New Year. And if nobody knows, or some of you may or may not know, it starts on January 25th and its effects on import container capacity and pricing. So Tony, going to send it over to you.
Thank you. Chinese New Year used to be a nightmare for importers, NVOs, and steamship lines. It's interesting. I believe our industry is changing. Let's start with the tariffs and the effect that it's had in 2019 with, I would say we had a normal bid season where the BCOs, put their work out for bids. That's February through April, and they have their fixed contracts. Then there's the back to school period, which is a heavy. I think would start probably early, I would say mid-June through August. But if it's not in the warehouses, you're going to miss the back to school. But that was soft primarily because of the tariffs again. And I like to say the fall heavy holiday season, shipping was non-existent. It didn't happen.
Really?
It did not happen. Capacity was available. A lot of the shippers didn't, have the peak season surcharges where that would normally be added on. A lot of the shippers, a lot of the importers, because of, changed the way they were thinking. Some said, hey, I have high inventories because my sales are soft. We're going to hold off on bringing anything in. And that's what a lot of people saw. It was a very light fall fourth quarter as far as service suppliers like myself. And as far as any other, I do a lot of retail work, a lot of retailers not bringing product. This is the TJXs. This is the Nikes. This is, even though the bulk of they have a lot of shoes coming out of Vietnam, but the other apparel, the sweatshirts, T-shirts that come out of China, they weren't coming. Same with Under Armour. I guess, and which leads me up to trying to stay on point to what's going to happen with Chinese New Year. What's happening now? We have our spot rates. The spot rates used to change weekly. They change daily now. You know what much you have to offer a customer, and they'll fluctuate. Sometimes it'll go a swing of $300. For example, going to the West Coast, when I looked this morning, base ports in China for a 40-foot container was $1,400. I heard it's going to probably drop down to maybe $1,200. East Coast, between 26 and 24, it may go down to 23. And this is before Chinese New Year. After, for example, I have some numbers here, if I may. Well, you've heard of the blank sailings. This is when the steamship lines we're going to take this ship out of service, essentially to reduce the capacity.
Right.
So in doing that, so that, hey, we can up the rate that we're selling not just to our customers, but we can put a surcharge on it, because there's less capacity. For example, and I have this just for week 4. I will say January. Last week in January, they've taken out 4 sailings, which is the equivalent of 20,000 containers. Week 5, that's February. They took out 13 sailings, which is 65,000, and so on. And so what's happened? They've done that for the first and second weeks in January, taking out a total of 45,000 container locations, but nobody's biting. There's no rush. The rush would start now because the factory's going to be closed down, and everybody wants to get their product out, but it's not happening.
Huh.
So our industry's changing. I think it's changing because of the tariffs. It could be changed because of tariffs and people relocating their manufacturing to Vietnam, to maybe some Mexico, North America. But we don't right now, and this may change tomorrow because that's how, volatile our industry is, that we are changing to the extent that we have to see, we as service providers always have to be on our toes to adapt and kind of, if the rate changes tomorrow, I have to get that rate to a customer. If a service level changes, we have to do that.
Yeah, it's a lot of work. I remember obviously I worked for a freight forwarder for a very long time, and I can only imagine what is happening these days, right? Because after 2008, the customers started demanding that we quote on everything. And it's just gotten worse from there, I think. I mean, Audrey, you're the customer, you're the shipper. Can you weigh in here? What are you seeing from, a rate standpoint? Are you guys shipping as much? Where do you see the changes happening? Give us some context on it.
So we're one of maybe the few that are shipping because we are a global business. So we've got quite a bit of stuff coming into Canada, which obviously isn't affected the same way by the tariffs on Asia. We are still seeing quite a bit of goods moving into the US, and then we have a few really strong European customers. So we do our prep for Chinese New Year early in the year. So usually we start the planning around August and September. And that's for those last minute orders, really, because we'll get cutoffs from our factory in November or for October, sorry, that, if you don't place your order by X date, it's not going to happen before we go. And then from my perspective, from logistics, supply chain, and customs, we do an update in September reminding our teams to start planning for bookings, especially with Chinese New Year. It's very early this year. So Jan 25th means that your last booking, like your last sailing out of China, is going to be that week, which means your closing is the week 3 or week 2. So you need to have your bookings traditionally really early. So we actually had about 14 to 16 bookings on Christmas Day, Boxing Day, and Friday, because we've been pushing our colleagues to kind of get your dates lined up and get your factories to book early.
Right.
We'll see this year what happens again. Like Tony says, it's such a volatile business right now with tariffs, with the 2 weeks ago, Trump lowered some of the tariffs. So then are people going to start pushing their products out because tariffs have shifted? I don't know. And so my concern is, are we going to have rollovers in the same way we did last year? There are a ton of blank sailings. So even if I want the service, it's not available to me. So that's why we've been pushing for get those earlier bookings. So at least we're booked in, even if we hand over the goods, at least they're there. At least when a vessel does go, say week 3 of February, that it actually gets out. So it's very hard to plan, and so it's hard to manage. It's hard for me to be passing on information to my teammates who are then, passing on that information to the customer. So we just try to have a very consistent tone, consistent information, book early, and but ultimately we're just crossing our fingers and hoping for the best.
Right. Well, when I did some research, and I want to just, for some of our listeners or viewers that don't know too much about Chinese New Year, or know that it comes around, but not really sure how to plan for it. So I'm just going to go over some things really, really briefly, because I think Anthony wants to weigh in, and then we'll go on to the next topic. But this year, I think it's happening early. So January 25th for Chinese New Year is actually a lot earlier than it usually is.
It's like Easter, though. It cycles.
Yeah, depending on the year, right?
Yeah, January 25th, it could be as late as February 15th. So
Sure.
So it's kind of in that time frame. And so all factories shut down usually for a whole month. So some of the things that I read up on that they said to do is to get confirmation of shutdown schedules for each department that you work with. Some admin will stay open longer than production. Getting back to normal can take an additional month because some workers just don't show up after the holiday and could cause disruptions to the supply chain. So keep that into account. start production in late November, which I think is what Audrey was saying. No last minute orders or they're going to get caught up in Chinese New Year. And don't make any deposits prior to Chinese New Year, as some suppliers shut down and never open again. And so I think these are pretty vital points to make about Chinese New Year if you're importing and exporting, but you might be a small to medium-sized business that doesn't really maybe know the repercussions, or just some points to really keep in mind as we get into Chinese New Year. So did you want to close this out, Anthony, with a couple of thoughts?
Well, it's interesting that some factories will close for a month, and they'll close as early, as mid-December. It's all about, I agree, it's all about communication with everybody in the supply chain, whether it's a buyer or somebody in procurement. If it's obviously if it's a factory, it's very important that they communicate with each other as far as when the product's going to be available. And once it's available, their supply chain management teams do their due diligence in booking and scheduling the product to move as soon as possible. It's not an easy thing to do. Particularly and I agree with you as far as what you brought up about some of the smaller vendors in China. You're going to send them your money. That has happened. That's happened to some customers I know. That all of a sudden they're gone. They don't have their product, and the company's no longer there. So it's you're dancing. I don't know. I'll say you're playing third base. Whatever comes, you deal with it. However it comes.
That is a good one.
That's it.
Yeah.
I wish there was a better way to, particularly now. Audrey mentioned that they're proactive, and I wish some other customers, other shippers were, because we're the tail end of it, so we deal with the headaches. But again, I don't. You mentioned 2008. That was a lot of shippers made a lot. Freight forwarders and VLCCs and steam supplies made a lot of money because of all the nonsense that went back on in 2008. But I think the importers have become a little smarter too. We're not going to deal with that anymore. so they've changed their shipping patterns. Yeah, there's been some capacity issues. There'll be some rollovers, but nothing like 2008. This year, I don't think they'll be with the blank sailings. Yeah. And it's New Year's this week. Mm-hmm. A lot of stuff should be booked, or it's not going to be booked now. So, or it's not, it's going to have, there may be some issues in booking, but I just don't. We haven't, and I just mean me, the Kuehne+Nagels, the panel, the DSVs. I'm sorry I said panel DSV, but they don't see it. And all of a sudden, I may be eating my words next week, but I just think it's going to be very soft.
Not going to lie, I don't mind if no one else is on those vessels and it's just...
all your product can move. We have the contracts too, and I'll give the steamship lines a plug. They don't want to roll your cargo. You have your contract. They want to move everything they got. They certainly don't want you to go to an NVO or anybody else with it for that capacity that they can't get from you. So no, I know some people have had issues with their contracts and not being able to get space, but that was the earlier part of this year, and after Chinese New Year 2019. But when the second round of tariffs were coming out, that's when some were having some issues. But no, I don't see it.
Well, and that is a good place to end off on this topic.